what we're seeking is people that we can have intimate friendships with, that we can go through struggles with, that are going to show up at your door, if your child is sick, that ultimately what we are seeking as human beings is close interpersonal relationships that we can pray together, we can love each other.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Homeschool Podcast. I'm your host, Paola, and today my guest is Bonnie Landry, and I am so thrilled to be able to have this cozy conversation with her today. For those who do not know Bonnie, I'm going to read the bio before but our conversation today is going to be all about community. What does community actually mean? Do we need community? How many people actually make up a community? And can you actually start one yourself? So before we begin diving into community, let's say hi, Bonnie. Hi, how are you today?
Hi, Paola. So nice to be here.
So good. I think, both of us as veteran homeschool moms, we both have 7 children.
Okay.
I got married in 1987. Yes.
Got married in 91.
Okay.
Yes.
So very close to each other.
1990. Yes. But I don't know if you know a bit of background to my story, that I had been previously married before I was Catholic. So my first daughter is actually from that marriage. My husband adopted her. And so our kids are probably about the same age then, because my oldest is 35. Yeah.
40, he's 34 this year. So
awesome.
Good. Well, let's read the official bio. Let's get that out of the way and then we'll dive right in. Okay. So for those of you who don't know Bonnie Landry is a Catholic mom who lives in the little hamlet of Cobble Hill on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. I'm here in Delaware. She's way over there on the other side. She and her husband, Albert, have been raising and homeschooling their 7 children since 1987, with 1 year left to go. Yay. Joy is her modus operandi. Life is kind of a bust if you can't get along with people, isn't it? So Bonnie's podcast, as I mentioned, and we will mention several times and put the link under this video, is Make Joy Normal Cozy Homeschooling. So again, thank you, Bonnie, for agreeing to be on this podcast. I'm so excited.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just before we hit the record button talking about, community. And I think both of us, being veteran homeschoolers, we are, yes, pre-Facebook people.
That makes us impossibly old, doesn't it?
And I think in some ways it was easier for us because we did not have that go-to. You feel lonely. Now you just hit the computer. But in those days, I really literally had to search for somebody, when I decided to do this crazy thing like homeschooling. It was like, I can't do this by myself. I need some other crazy person with me. So tell us a little bit of how you got started in terms of, because recently you did a podcast, and I invite everybody to go, Make Joy Normal. And it is all about community. And you did it with your dear friends, Brian and Lori Dennison. And that story, I love that story. Tell us a little bit about how you guys met and how you started community.
Yeah. So we were living up island. I was already homeschooling. We had, I believe, 3 kids. Yeah, we each had 3 kids at the time. And they lived about an hour and a half away from where we are. And we happened to meet. We used to go to a conference in Seattle. And we met up at this conference in Seattle, which was a Catholic Homeschool conference. And even though it was in the States, it was actually the closest one to us. So Lori and I had met very briefly a year or 2 before at a talk. A speaker had come over to the island that we both happened to be at, and we got chatting, and we knew each other were Catholic. So I had that face, right, that I had connected with. So then when we ended up going to the Seattle conference, of course, I recognized her. And I knew they had a few families in their community and whatever that they were living down there. I think 3 or 4 families at that time. And so what happened was we linked up at this conference, and then we went back home. They went back home. And they said, oh, we'll have to have you guys over or whatever. And we had a really nice group of friends. basically our community that we lived in prior to moving here was almost every single church in the area. The pastor and his wife homeschooled their kids. Right. So we were the only Catholics, but there was somebody basically from every church in the small area we were from. And that was becoming, somewhat awkward because we didn't share a faith. We shared many things, but the nuts and bolts of our faith were different. And so as the kids were getting older and we're sort of discussing these things, it became difficult. But anyway, Brian started pestering us. He would phone us over and over again over the course of several months. He would phone maybe every once a month or something like that. Hi, would you guys like to do something with us? And my husband would say, well, why? Why? I don't really understand why we would drive all the way down there for people. We have friends. And I said, okay, whatever. But then at some point he had called us enough times that I thought, you know what? I feel really rude. So I think we just need to go. So we decided, okay, we'll just go get it over with kind of thing. And then, as you know, from that podcast episode, what happened was Lori and I, all the dads, we went on a little walk together. We prayed a rosary at the church, went on a walk together. All the dads sort of went up with the older kids and we're on this little hike we were on. And Lori and I ended up together. The two of us were both nursing 2 children. So we had an immediate bond. She was the only other person I'd ever met who was tandem nursing. And so she ended up, her and I were developing this great friendship. We recognized that right away. I had no idea what Albert was doing. And so off he was doing his thing. And Lori said, do you guys want to stay overnight and go to mass with us tomorrow morning? And I said, oh, I'd love to, but Albert would never do that. And so she said, well, just ask him. So then we met up with the guys. I don't know what his experience is, but obviously it was really amazing to meet Catholic dads who were really into their family, into their faith. And I said, Lori's asked us if we'd like to stay overnight. And he said, oh, well, we're going to have to stop and buy toothbrushes. And I just was like, what?
Yes.
And that was it. So
through. Yeah. He didn't say no.
So we traveled down here about once a month and spent the weekend for a few years, probably 6 years or something before we actually moved here. And at some point it became more practical for him to commute to his business, up island and us to move the family down here. Right.
Right. Oh my gosh. It's very reminiscent of, again, we have friends and we call them almost like cousins, very similar to that close knit friendships. They really are very close. And it was a similar thing. There was this invitation of just trying to find local homeschooling families. And I remember being at this, and I think it was a talk or something. And one of the moms sidled up to me and she's like, Paola, do your kids, do they get dressed up for Halloween? Trying to feel out, like, what level Catholic are you?
What kind of Catholic are you?
Yes. It was funny because, again, we were immersed with our beautiful Christian brothers and sisters, but there wasn't this unity of faith, overarching faith. And so immediately we had this bond. Our kids kind of matched up in ages. And that's all you need is to relate on one thing. It's this incredible bond, but then layer that on top of, as you said, the faith.
Yeah.
So one, we're saying you don't really need community, lots and lots of families, but let's just kind of begin with, how would you define community when we talk about homeschooling community in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have homeschool community on different layers because there is the homeschool community at large, secular, Protestant, Catholic, wonderful families that I connect with, fairly regularly. I'll have a wine and cheese at my house and just invite whatever homeschool family. So that's one level of community. I think the level of community that we should really be seeking, and it often starts at that more community, broader picture level. What we're seeking is people that we can have intimate friendships with, that we can go through struggles with, that are going to show up at your door. If your child is sick, that you share an intimate bond, you pray together, you deeply love each other, and so that is what we're seeking. Does that need to be very many? No, right? 1 or 2 families, ample. Right. To have a community, especially when you have large families. I mean, that's not always the case, but it's often the case in our circles. But what a beautiful thing to be able to have that, like you might have with a sibling. I come from an agnostic family. So for my family, I don't have the same relationship with my family. I love them to pieces. They're wonderful people. But I don't have the same relationship that I do with my Catholic community, who are, in essence, my family. And so I would say that ultimately, when we're kind of meeting people in our life and expressing our faith and the way our needs as a family and whatnot, that ultimately what we are seeking as human beings is close interpersonal relationships that we can pray together, we can love each other, right?
Right, exactly. And that, I think, is so core to what we're talking about, community, that friendships, because, again, running the Catholic homeschool community, one of the big questions I ask is, why do you want this community? And very often it is that, Bonnie, it is that trying to seek like-minded, like-hearted people that you want to bond with. So I know I have that close relationship with, as my dear friends always say, we're friends for life. We do all that. So
something I think that's worth noting in the sort of defining of community, one of the ways that we've built community is that we do a Catholic homeschool camp, which if people want to know more about it, they can listen to that episode. It's something that I've been thinking about doing a podcast about how to organize a camp, because I think it'd be helpful for people. But there are people who we only see once a year that are some of our dearest friends, right? Because they come to that. And so if you lived 5 hours away from somebody that you felt was, for lack of a better word, a soulmate, that your family's connected, if you only got together for a week or two of the year and just went camping, your two families, or met, somewhere for a little mini holiday, that would be a beautiful thing. Your kids would look forward to it every year, right?
Wow. Yeah, I would love to delve into some of those activities, because I know for us, we had a local, swim and gym. And again, it was that larger community, but within that, I found soul sisters, also even found opportunities to stretch and challenge ourselves, because as you say, you meet families that have different parenting styles than you. So even though you may share the faith, you run into all those different, aspects. So one of the things I think both of us have experienced in all these years is that we've seen a disintegration of groups, or groups that come and go. You mentioned you guys have a really, really special group. What do you think makes the difference?
I think there are two things, really. I think it's the dads being really involved, right? That we're friends as families, right? So I'm talking about at this point, our larger Catholic community, which are primarily homeschoolers. Some of them are not homeschoolers. But if we were to get together to pray a rosary or have a party of some sort, these would be the people we would invite. So maybe there's, 10 or 12 families, right? Varying in age range. Some of them are second gen, right? And I think that all of them, the dads are really involved. But I think even more than that, and I think the dads being involved is related to this, is that these are all people whose deepest desire is to increase their own personal holiness and to draw closer to God and to get to heaven. And so that, to me, has to be the thing to prevent the undoing, because there's been differences in our community. There's been difficulties, right? But there's always been a willingness to work through them. And I think that that's what's the beautiful thing. And a lot of times it's very easy because there is different parenting styles. There's different ideals, a different way of living your life. But if we all desire to understand the other better and see Christ in the other, that's what's going to carry you through that, right? And there was some wonderful examples of holiness that and marriage that drew me up, and made us an example to really, really know and desire what it is Christ wants for the body, his church.
Yeah. And that's kind of how, again, you began that in terms of, I do believe we are created to relate. God made it on purpose, that we're not alone. So there's this longing and desire for that unity within us. And so you mentioned that but I think it is in terms of, I don't know, I'm a better person left to my own devices. I tremble.
I know. I often wonder, if we had stayed up where we were before moving here, what would it have been like? Maybe it would have been okay, but we don't know. And I suspect that we would not always being called to the mat and only by example. It's not like people were calling us out. It was by example. How did you work through that difficulty in your family? How did you work through your marriage issues? How did you deal with that child who's wandered from the church, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly so well said. One of the things I'd like to think about is that people will say, I want to be a part of a group. They don't even know how to start one. So let's talk a little bit about that. But also that everybody has something to give, some value to give.
Absolutely.
So, unpack that a little bit for me in terms of how do you even start, and what have you experienced in terms of how people give and contribute into the community?
Well, I think that everybody has something to offer somebody, even if you don't see yourself as a starter or whatever. If you have some passion, maybe it's gardening, maybe it's foraging, maybe it's wild flora and fauna in your area, maybe it's antique trains, I don't know, whatever it is, knitting, it doesn't matter. If you just invite a few people, or I can guarantee that somebody will be interested in what you do. And if you're passionate about it, you're passing on your passion. So, if you're a bird watcher and you say, hey, I want to go out bird watching, and I wondered if a few families might like to come along with me, even if only one other family came, that's something, right? That's something. I think another thing that is really valuable is actually, are you familiar with the Siena Institute?
The Siena, no.
So the Siena Institute is an institute organized to help individuals discover their charism.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I think Called and Gifted is called, right?
Yes.
And Called and Gifted is really
predominantly for adults. I have reached out to them for teenagers, but it's an adult.
It's really geared for adults. But as homeschooling parents, we do need to set that example for our children as we're going to try. So it's one of the ways you can discover is, okay, maybe I'm not meant to organize field trips, but maybe I could have another family or two over and I could teach English, or do a movie study or a book study with another couple of families, right? Mm-hmm. So it helps you discover where your charisms lie and that maybe you're not using them in the best way, because if you're using your charisms, you're using your natural gifts, your supernatural gifts, it's going to be life-giving, right? So they're going to gain, the people attending, but so are you, right? And praying always, being prayerful about, what are you calling me to, Lord? What are you calling my family to?
I think one of the other things that you mentioned that I love too is this idea that you don't have to do it perfectly, right?
I don't do anything perfectly, but I do get lots of things done. There's a saying, the enemy of perfect. What is it saying? The enemy of done is perfect.
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. I'll have to find the quote. You can put it in your show notes, but It's so true that if we think that it has to be perfect, well, you're almost done before you start.
Exactly. And that's it, Bonnie. So it's like, just try it. And, it may be a disaster of a gathering. And, to be honest, there were some situations where there were family, I invited a family over, and for us, we would do things as simple as, we always slow down on Sundays. We go to mass and we would just have a brunch. Brunch is like a simple, easy. We can always scramble up a bunch of eggs, get some orange juice, a few rolls.
People can dodge early if they're not having fun.
Exactly. So it was always a great, easy way for us to get to know other families, even just to become well acquainted with people in our parish. But it was definitely, sometimes you didn't quite admit, it just didn't click. And that was okay. That was okay to do that. We invite. And I guess that was one of the other things, the importance of invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that does not have to be formal. You can say to another family, hey, do you want to meet us at a park? We're going to bring sandwiches. You don't have to have people over for dinner if you feel like that's going to stress you out. Don't do things that will stress you out, but do things that will de-stress you, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think especially one of the things I really wanted to bring this into the conversation is because, again, as we're going to be broadcasting this is going to be close to the time we're having this virtual conference, which really got started in the middle of lockdowns and shutdowns and loneliness. And people are really now that much more hungry for togetherness.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, really wanted to just get people to be able to, be inspired by your mission there, your experience, and our experience as well as the beauty of just having friends for life by just simply invitation. So what were some of the activities that you guys would do together? I know you talked about, what was it, maybe a gym day or?
Yeah, we always have had a gym night. And I mean, COVID's been the first time that has not happened, right? So, but there's always, and it's an event that we're doing. It's run by Catholics. It's very informal. But if there was other homeschoolers in the community or whatever that wanted to come, or other people from our parish who weren't homeschooling who wanted to come, that was fine. As long as they understood, that this is what we do, right? And however that plays out, just be content with it, right? So our regular things were like a gym night. We had a lake, our parish still owns it, but it has unfortunately been locked down the last couple of years. We had a property on the lake that was like a park. And so our rectory was there. So the priest lived there. And we would just meet at the lake on hot nights. We have tried to open up our yard to some degree. Of course, this all happened with a pandemic, so that hasn't worked out. It's only worked out a few times, but when we get back, we're just leaving on a long road trip. But when we get back, our plan is to have like one evening a week that everybody just gathers at our, in our backyard. We pray a rosary and have fun together. So that kind of thing, but also just meetups at parks and that sort of thing on the day to day. The other kinds of things that went on was like, I've always run a co-op. So in some years it's different, like whatever I've got in front of me and whatever I want to accomplish with my kids, I just say, hey, do you want to, you half a dozen families, your kids want to learn how to write an essay, or do they want to do some speech arts or whatever? So, and there were other parents who did similar things. Hey, they're really into biology. Hey, I can run some labs. Would your kids like to come? That sort of thing. And then we had some annual things that were really special, and like the camp that I was telling you about. So it was like a week-long camp. I hired a cook so the moms didn't have to cook. And the beautiful thing, we have a Christmas ball. My husband and I ballroom dance. So over the years, we taught all our teenagers to ballroom dance, like our own and the community. And so we thought, well, if we're going to teach them to dance, we might as well give them a venue. And so we have this beautiful Christmas ball every year, which is fantastic. And again, right from babies to grandparents kind of thing come to that. So that sort of thing, like some things very sort of big and splashy, and some things just really simple little, do you want to get together? And with, my friend Lori that was in the podcast episode, her and I used to get together and we would make pre-make breakfast. We'd make a bunch of banana bread and we'd make a bunch of crisp topping and things like that. Just we could get together, the kids could play, and we could actually help our homeschooling by the fact that we had just gotten together and made a bunch of breakfasts, right? Like 30 breakfasts or whatever.
Exactly.
So it can be simple or complex, right?
Right. Very, very reminiscent. Our area, we would get together on First Fridays. And it was really also a really great way, because a lot of families had hard times with many children to get to them to confession. So we would round robin to all the different churches in the area. And so this way the families would get to experience confession as a family together if it wasn't readily available. And we always made it a really great family time. So yes, it was that ability to do things that are of the faith, sometimes more of a academic nature. So yeah, the door is wide open.
Yeah.
I really see, Bonnie, it came from your heart. It came from the needs of your family, and you just extended those invitations.
Yeah, really. It was that simple, right?
Yes, it is. So I know, as I said, I had mentioned before, you're going to be speaking at the Catholic Homeschool Conference. Give us a little bit of a taste of what is that going to be. You're going to be doing a workshop, correct? On high school?
So it's going to be one of the live workshops, and it is on high school, which is lovely because I think that homeschooling is such a gift and something I've really found joyful. Being able to homeschool your kids through high school is just a really remarkable thing. And I don't think nearly as difficult as what you would anticipate, right? And I feel like it was those opportunities, those conversations that I had with my teenagers and those nighttime, chats with my husband and I, that closeness has really played out well in their adult life, I feel so grateful for that, and grateful to be able to provide them with a beautiful education as well. But it was the relationships that I think were really awesome. And the thing is, there's bumpy times, in the teen years and young adult years. There's bumpy times. They're figuring out who they are and what kind of person they are and what they're going to keep and not keep from how they've been raised. But if you can ride those bumps with them, you will come out stronger in the other end, right? So like your toddler, Yes. Toddlerhood is great, great training for teenagers.
Yes, it is in a very different way. But the point of the matter being is you really do have a limited amount of time with your children.
Yeah.
And they are, I love the teen years, just seeing them trying to, be the little birds trying to test out their wings, but still staying relatively close to the nest. And I can't say this enough. You can't underestimate our children's needs to get to know us.
Exactly. In a more adult way, for sure. It plays right back into community too. When you're talking about teaching high school, homeschooling high school, is that if you go back to that community, that effort that you made when they were young to develop community, those are the kids they go off to college with. Those are the kids they take holidays with. Those are the kids they become, part of their social circle. And we're seeing that now because our, older kids are all having babies and they're getting, they're developing their adult friendships as mothers now, and they've got, my son's on a road trip right now with one of the boys he was homeschooled with, they're 22, 23, and they're driving across Canada, and you just can't undervalue that. Like, what a beautiful thing to have those kinds of high school bonds, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we have seen the same exact thing in our own family as well.
Yeah. So I guess snapshot of the talk, I'm hoping to kind of encourage people and lift them up about creating a joyful education for their high schoolers.
Yes.
Getting through that with grace. Yeah.
And you're right. I agree. It's not as difficult as you think. Of course, we have that lofty position because we now have married kids and this, and we truly believe us, it really isn't as hard as you think. And it's really, when you think about it, I always say too, people tend to look more at the curriculum. And I love, Bonnie, that you brought right there in the forefront. It's really about relationships with God, relationships with their parents, with other friends. That's really the most important. So I will also be speaking in a mom's panel at the conference going.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, with Jen McIntosh and Danielle Bean, and I will be answering questions in a Q&A kind of mom panel. So we're really, really looking forward to that as well. I do want to, again, mention that Bonnie has a podcast, Make Joy Normal. Where can people find you, Bonnie? What is the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, it's just, if you can go to my website, bonnielandry.ca, there's a direct link to the podcast there. The podcast address is www.bonnielandry. No, it's not. www.makejoynormal.buzzsprout.com.
Okay, great. But we will put the links so you don't have to worry and write it down.
Awesome.
We'll get those links under this video here. We do appreciate you coming to speak with us. One more thing I would just like to say, if you're meeting a young family who wants to form community, what would be just one thing, I know, to kind of sum it up, that you would like to leave this little talk with for that young family says, I want to find community?
Yeah. The first thing I would do is pray about it, right? Always pray about finding community where lead us, Lord, right? To where we need to be. But I think the second thing we can do is to find out which churches in our area, and it might not be the closest one to you, where the homeschoolers hang out, because there's often a church within an hour's radius where they will tend to migrate towards, and often that starts because there's just 2 or 3 families homeschooling that go there. And so that's where people end up. That's usually where it'll start. And then it might turn out that, oh, actually you live in my neighborhood, even though you're coming to this church, you live in my neighborhood. So we should start getting together. Right.
Right.
So good place to start.
That is beautiful. Yes. And I also do want to mention to the people who are watching this that, there is the Catholic homeschool community. We do have the feature in the community that you can find members near me. And we are we've started a group of homeschool leaders. And this is a smaller group. And again, to share some of the things, and I hope Bonnie, to invite you into that group as well. You had mentioned about, how to run an event and things like that. We can share tips and guides and learn from each other. So there will be,
Absolutely.
it's a free group. It's within there, and it's homeschool leaders from around the world being
That'd be
able to
awesome. Yeah.
help and build each other up.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much for joining
You're
me
so
today.
welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And may God bless you abundantly.
Thanks. God bless, Paola.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. Thank you, and have a blessed day.